what we learn, and I'm sure this is what you learn too, is that cholesterol has no business being in our bloodstream, basically. And animal fat and saturated fats will raise your cholesterol. So that makes them the enemy. And that makes vegetable oils, which lower your cholesterol, the solution. And that's why I had to write Dark Calories.
Yes. I want to dive all into this topic of seed oils. Hello, and welcome to Pursuing Health. I'm Dr. Julie Fouché, family physician and former CrossFit Games athlete. Here, I bring you information and inspiration to help bridge the gap between fitness and medicine and support your journey toward your healthiest self. Thank you so much for joining me. Now let's get started with this week's episode. Welcome back to Pursuing Health. I am very excited to be joined today by Dr. Cate Shanahan. She is a board-certified family physician with over 20 years of clinical experience. She has a BS in biology from Rutgers University. She trained in biochemistry and genetics at Cornell University's graduate school before she then attended Robert Wood Johnson Medical School. She practiced in Hawaii for 10 years, where she studied ethnobotany and her healthiest patients' culinary habits, and then applied her learning and experiences in all of these scientific fields to write Deep Nutrition: Why Your Genes Need Traditional Food. She's now the New York Times bestselling author of the FatBurn Fix, Deep Nutrition, and Food Rules, and her expertise is in fixing the underlying problems that cause metabolic damage and inflammation, leading to autoimmunity, weight gain, diabetes, cancer, and accelerated aging processes. Her passion is in helping people feel their best. And her most recent book, Dark Calories, explains how 8 common seed oils cause the cellular damage that underlies virtually all chronic disease, exposes the corruption that deceives doctors and consumers alike, and gives us a clear roadmap to recovery and rejuvenation. So I'm very excited to be sitting down with you and chatting. Dr. Cate, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much, Julie. It's great to be here with you, a fellow MD.
Yes, I know. I feel such a kinship to you because we both followed this path to family medicine and had this desire that really wasn't fulfilled by the conventional healthcare system of really wanting to help our patients find true health. And now really trying to help get to the truth and share that knowledge with patients and with the public. So thank you for all that you have done and are continuing to do to spread that knowledge. And I would love to start with just a little bit about your path, how you ended up deciding to become a family doctor, and then when you realized that there has to be a better way of doing things than what I'm doing in my 15-minute office visit prescribing pills.
Yeah. So, I was discouraged from going into medicine by my dad, who was a doctor. And he was talking about there's going to be a physician glut. This was in the 70s.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What he didn't see coming is the huge chronic disease, basically crisis, that we have more physicians now than ever, and still people can't get in because people are sicker than ever. He just didn't see that. I mean, how could he, right?
Now we're having a huge shortage, right?
So it was roundabout. Like I wanted to be a doctor from the beginning because I loved it that he could tell my mom what was wrong with my brother when he had like recurring ear infections and stuff. And just like, no, we don't need to rush off to the emergency room. That kind of relieving stress. I loved that. Just to watch it all melt away on her face. And I was like, wow, that's power. I want to do that to help people.
Yeah.
So instead I tried to be an engineer. That was so boring.
Oh, me too. Wow. We're more similar than we realized.
And then I tried to be, a biomedical engineer, a biological engineer. Actually, I wanted to invent bacteria that could digest plastic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because baby diapers, they were the big problem. This was way before water bottles, even
Okay.
way before we had the plastic problem that we do now. But it just seemed like after a year learning how complex cells are and how complex DNA is, and that cells are just control freaks, it's going to be hard to really be able to engineer them into a way that we could do what we want. I was like, I forget it. I'll just go to medical school. Third time's the charm. And I was really hoping to be able to get to the root cause of selfishly my own problems, because I had a lot of recurring athletic injuries because I was
Okay.
a pretty serious runner. I actually got invited to the like the Olympic trials in
Oh, wow.
Germany a long time ago.
That's amazing.
Yeah, for a distance run. And so I wanted to know, like, why was I the one on the team that kept getting the shin splints and the bursitis and the hip problems and had to be swimming in the pool when I wanted to be running in a forest? But we didn't learn that stuff. So, I settled into family medicine because at least that was a one where you really had to communicate with your patients. You really had to be that detective. It wasn't just like, quickly get into the operating room or just, do the same thing over. Like the specialist just seemed like, how could I spend my whole life just looking at people's skin or, talking about kidneys?
Just doing one thing. Yeah.
Right, exactly. You can relate. So anyway, after graduation, I was this shiny new doctor who was partly really sad inside because a third of my practice was literally just mindlessly refilling prescriptions, or felt pretty mindless, cookbook. I could have been a robot.
Right.
And drugs for blood pressure and diabetes and cholesterol and even asthma and depression. It didn't really help people's problems. It didn't keep them from having heart attacks, the high blood pressure management and the cholesterol management. They still had heart attacks. They still had strokes. They still ended up in the hospital. And people with asthma just needed more and more medications, right? Like over the years, their asthma often would get worse and they would have to take not just inhalers, but multiple inhalers and steroid drugs to suppress a whole immune system. And it was just like, what is really going on? Am I making a difference? Why not? I didn't know it was missing. And then, for me, it was, I got really sick.
Okay.
Like you probably heard this kind of story before. There was some kind of like a derailment. And my derailment was my own same problems. It was joint problems, except it was worse than ever. And this time I was getting fevers and nobody could help. Nobody could even tell me what it was. And I couldn't
Wow.
walk, was threatening my career. And
Wow.
so like not having any clue of what to do, I decided that it was probably possibly worth listening to my husband, who was telling me that, maybe there's something about nutrition that's important that I didn't learn. Because
All right.
right? Yeah, he thought
Credit
that.
to the husband there
Yeah, oh God. Yeah, well,
for
it
being
was hard to.
persistent.
I had been ignoring that for a long time
Right.
because I was a sugar addict, and that's what it was. He was saying you might not be doing so good for yourself by eating, all the sugar. I had a quarter of a cup of sugar in my coffee.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's quite a bit.
Yeah, and you can't just pour it in. I had to make myself a special caramel sauce, so I did that every few days. So that was the beginning of this like new world of answers that would help me make the connections that I was never able to make. And so, I got into the oil part of it because that was biochemistry, right? I was a biochemist. I loved just the the rules of biochemistry to me felt like you can't understand the body without understanding these rules and how molecules interact, because the way molecules interact determines how life became what it is today as we know it. So I just thought that was so fascinating. So it was kind of like trying to study economics without studying math, right?
Right.
And we didn't really learn how to put the biochemistry into practice on a daily basis other than with drugs.
Isn't that it blows my mind that we spend so much time in pre-med, undergrad, and then the first year or two of med school studying such basic science and biochemistry. But then once you get into your clinical rotations, it's almost like that goes out the window and it's all about these guidelines and protocols. And there's a lot of like forgetting the basic science and the root causes. So I love that you were able to identify that through your own experience and then bring that in your work with patients. I also loved how you said you studied ethnobotany and your patients' culinary habits in Hawaii. So can you explain a little bit about what is ethnobotany and what did you learn from them?
So ethnobotany is the cultural knowledge of botany, plants. And so it's
Okay.
basically herbalism, but more indigenous, so
Okay.
herbalism is kind of like, it's a school that we go to and it's out of books. But the indigenous way of doing it is that you go out in a forest and you learn to identify the plants and their whole ecosystem and the time of year that their potency is going to help people for amazing things. I mean, people had just this amazing knowledge of how to stop bleeding, how to help infections. On Hawaii, they used this fermented fruit called ugly fruit or noni. And my sister had no insurance when she lived there while I was there. And for some reason, she didn't want to ask me for help. And so she just went to this like stump of an old tree that had some fermenting, foul-smelling noni liquid and slathered it on her cellulitis, and it got
Wow.
better.
Wow. It's amazing. Well, it's amazing all the things nature can do when you understand them. There's so much to be learned from these indigenous cultures.
Yeah, there's so
That sounds like such a great experience.
well, it was for me too, like, because what I really learned that I thought was even more amazing than that was just the culinary part of it, right? Like I asked, so ethnobotany was a course I took, and I asked the instructor, why isn't there an ethnobeefery? Like that was part of the thing. Why don't we learn why are we obsessed with plants? And like, why not learn how people caught fish and cooked fish and preserved fish and the same with meats and birds and everything else. And the answer, he didn't tell me the answer, but directly, but what I got was, oh, because plants are basically the pharmaceutical companies, free source of trial and, the early clinical phase trials, right? Like that's what they're after. They're after patenting a drug. So that's why they don't study the other indigenous knowledge, which is more important, which is what people actually ate, because that's kept them from getting sick. And so that's what my first book, Deep Nutrition, was all about, what people actually ate and how their knowledge was just so much more advanced than what I had learned in medical school. It was really a celebration of the thousands of years of knowledge that medical school actively ignores and shuts down.
Right. And really that we don't get. I mean, we don't get hardly any training in nutrition. So let alone more nutrition related to what has been used for centuries.
Yeah. So, what you just said is so like depressing. We get so little training in nutrition, because the other side of that is what little that we do learn, it's not right. Right?
Right. And it's totally not, most of it is like not even really relevant.
Well, here's what
you
it
know?
is, though. It makes yeah, like it's not relevant to health, but it is relevant to the discussion, because what we learn, and I'm sure this is what you learn too, is that cholesterol has no business being in our bloodstream, basically. And animal fat and saturated fats will raise your cholesterol. So that makes them the enemy. And that makes vegetable oils, which lower your cholesterol, the solution. And that's why I had to write Dark Calories.
Yes. Yes. I want to dive all into this topic of seed oils. So, I'd love to go into a little bit of the history too, and just the different types of fats. So maybe you could start with just, when we hear it thrown around like healthy fats versus unhealthy fats, and there's such confusion and controversy about what that is. So maybe you could just describe, like, what are the different types of naturally occurring fats? And then at what point did seed oils come into the picture, and why and how?
Yeah, so saturated and monounsaturated fats are the most prevalent fats in our body is supposed to be, and in animal fat too, because we're animals, right? So and those are more solid at room temperature. So that, like butter, that's why butter is solid. It's got a lot of saturated fat. Olive oil has a lot of monounsaturated fat and some saturated fat. Have you ever stuck olive oil in the fridge?
I don't know if I have.
It starts to solidify pretty quickly because it is
Okay.
less polyunsaturated, right? The
Okay.
polyunsaturates are just more liquidy. And so that's why, you can stick corn oil in the fridge and it won't solidify for months and months. It takes a long time. That's kind of like the physical difference. And but like that's like seems kind of irrelevant, and truthfully the only reason anyone even ever cares about it is because of a lie that started in the American Heart Association. They said because the saturated fats do solidify on the in the fridge, therefore they will solidify in your arteries and clog up your arteries like grease in a pipe. So that's why doctors talk about, like, that's the only reason. And that was a lie, right? Because, that's the original theory. Did you know that?
I did not know that's
Yeah,
where it originally came from. That's
yeah.
crazy.
Because
Although, I mean, it could make sense that they would have thought that many, many years ago. And
yeah,
I see how many times ideas are perpetuated even when they don't actually make scientific sense.
right. So like quickly that was shifted into, oh, wait, no. As soon as they found out that that's not how it works, that the body doesn't just like take fats from the diet and put them directly into the bloodstream. It doesn't work at all like that. It cannot happen that way any more than we take, meat from the diet in chunks, and chunks of meat now circulating in our blood. It gets digested, it gets encapsulated in the things that help it circulate in the bloodstream. It's not that simplistic, but that's the idea that was promoted initially by this guy who worked with the American Heart Association. Eventually, they quickly morphed that into, oh, wait, no, saturated fat raises your cholesterol. And cholesterol, now that's the problem. This time we got it right. And again, of course, I'm saying that sarcastically because that's wrong. Cholesterol is a nutrient, it's not a toxin. That was a lie. But that's the only reason we have these stupid conversations. I mean, they're not stupid, they're important conversations. But that's the only reason we have to get into this kind of mind-bending level of technical detail. And I don't like that we have to do that. We have to do that because in order to understand that the American Heart Association has been lying to us from the beginning, we have to know what the lie is. But the conversation around nutrition is a little bit different. It feels more practical. So I like to more focus on that.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about seed oils in comparison to these naturally occurring fats that you just mentioned. How did seed oils even come to be? They're not things that you just naturally find in nature and can consume.
No, they didn't exist until the industrial era because they're made from seeds that they never had any culinary application by mankind. Their first application was as for things like machine oil and soap.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I want to talk about a little bit, I guess. Yeah,
sure.
maybe.
Yeah,
how did it go from that?
How did it go from soap to making up 30% of our calories?
Yeah. So, and I probably should list out what I'm talking about. So it's not all vegetable oil. There really isn't a correct term. So I had to coin my own term. That's why I coined the term hateful 8 to help people at least remember there's 8 of them. And they do come from seeds, not like broccoli and carrots and real vegetables. And the seeds themselves are not the problem. They come from corn, canola, cottonseed, soy, sunflower, safflower, and rice bran, and grape seeds. So those
and I love how you have that way of remembering them: 3 C's, 3 S's, and then 2 other ones that helps me remember in my mind too.
Yeah, good. And the 3 C's and 3 S's are really the most important to memorize because those are the ones that are going to be on labels. The other 2 are mostly in restaurants. So these are in all your processed foods and a lot of, food that we wouldn't think of as processed food, even like salad dressing and mayonnaise. So memorize at least the Sinister 6.
Oh, I like all of these nice, catchy ways to remember them.
So those are bad. And how did they go from being machine oil or soap or whatever into the food supply? Well, they couldn't have done it without the help of chemists. And a company called Procter and Gamble really led the way at the end of the 1900s. They were needing to find an alternative to use for what they had been using cottonseed oil for, which was like lamp oil. and they needed an alternative because of electricity. So they're like, oh gosh, we need something else. So can we turn it into soap maybe? And they hydrogenated it, which is an extremely intensive factory process. You strip out all of the nutrients. You strip out everything except for the bare bones of the fat there. Extremely chemistry intensive. So there's nothing, it's not right there. It's already something that we've never would have eaten before if we were to eat that. And what they did then after they stripped everything out and hydrogenated it was they realized, hey, this kind of looks a little bit like lard also. So not only did they sell it as soap, they modified the process a little bit to make it a little softer than soap, and they called it Crisco.
Wow.
So Crisco actually is hydrogenated and is less toxic than the liquid oil.
Okay, good to know.
Right. Yeah. So the trans fat and everything, the trans fat ban that we thought was going to solve this problem of bad fats in our food supply absolutely did not, because it opened the door for something worse to be put in our fryers, and that is the liquid vegetable oils. So why are the liquid vegetable oils worse? Well, you see, the hydrogenation process actually made them less toxic than having it be just in its liquid form. So it was even harder to make it edible in its liquid form than it was to hydrogenate it. And that took many more decades of development to make cottonseed oil, because that was the first one, edible in its liquid form. And the same applies to the other ones. It was very, very difficult. The next big one was soy oil, which was a byproduct of the animal confinement industry, because they wanted to feed animals soy to fatten them up quicker because it's higher in protein. But soybeans would go rancid, so they had to remove the oil. That's the part that goes rancid. Then they had all
Okay.
this oil. What are they going to do with it? Oh, feed it to people. Right? Feed it to,
Right, not good enough for all the animals. Let's feed it to humans.
yeah, right. I mean, because, cows don't eat that much fat in their diet. They can't. And, even pigs, when you gave them too much oil, it it wasn't good for them. It wasn't good for their processing. It changed their body fat. It changed their pig fat, changed pork fat, made it too soft.
Okay.
By the way, it does the
Wow.
same thing to people. Now that we're eating as much, as much, our body fat is different. Disgusting. So that's one of the things that it's doing to us that, medical science is not considering, not talking about, just has no idea that this is even happening. Although surgeons have noticed that it's changed our body fat. Have you ever probably haven't ever asked a surgeon, but, next time you talk to one, see if they've ever noticed that, like, some people have a body fat that is a different consistency, that is just like more prone to not healing. That's what they notice.
This is fascinating. It's fascinating that these oils came into our diets really because of other industries that had waste products that they were trying to be creative about using and being
Yeah.
able to probably profit from. And so they're not naturally occurring. They've required a lot of processing in order to be edible. And now that we're consuming these, and you've said that they compose about 30% of our total daily calories on average, which is quite a lot. What do we know about what happens to these in our bodies once we consume them? What impact do they have on our health?
Yeah, so it's taken me a while to figure this out. And I need to say that this is like my body of research and nobody else is talking about it. And that's why I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be on podcasts, because I'm not at a university. I don't head an institution, and the institutions are trying to shut me down. So I need every bit of help I can get to get this message out. Because what they're doing is they're completely destroying our health at that cellular level. We do learn about how complicated the cell is before we go to medical school. And then we forget all about all that. But everything that the cell needs to do, these oils make it harder. And the place that these oils do their dirtiest work is at the cell membrane. So every cell in your body is surrounded by a complicated cell membrane that is really a little bit of a incredible biologic technology, because it has receptors that respond to hormones. It has receptors that respond to nutrients. It has to know when to put those receptors on the surface. It has to take them off the surface when there's enough of those nutrients. It has to get rid of the garbage, and it has to be able to be recognized by the immune system so that the immune system doesn't kill it unnecessarily. All this is happening on the cell membrane. And the vegetable oils make it almost impossible for your cells to have healthy cell membranes. Everybody's affected a little bit differently, so everybody has different diseases. If this is affecting your skin, you'll have skin problems, whether it's psoriasis or bad acne or eczema, very, very common now in kids, eczema. And if it's affecting your gut, you'll have all kinds of bloating, and you'll feel like, gosh, there's like, what foods can I eat? I never know what's going to trigger my bloating, right? It can even cause inflammatory bowel disease. This has been shown in human studies, and like Crohn's disease, serious, like, life-changing Crohn's disease. People have to have their colon and their intestines removed, parts of them. So it's these vegetable oils make it so that your cells can't keep those cell membranes functioning properly. And it has to do with the fact that there's polyunsaturated fatty acids in the cell membrane, and they need to be protected by antioxidants. And oxygen will attack them without antioxidants, and the vegetable oils deplete the body of all of its arsenal of oxygen controlling enzymes and compounds. And it's very complicated. This is why it's taken me so many years to figure it out, because I've been writing about this since 2004.
Wow.
This book just came out in 2024. I've written 4 other books on the subject, and this has all new information, mostly new.
Wow. Wow.
So there's many manifest, bad things that it does. It is the worst thing. The main thing to know is it's the worst thing in the food supply. If you want to, we keep hearing. I mean, you've probably had other guests on, right, Julie, that are saying, no, we got to worry about this or that or the other thing, right? And it gets kind of overwhelming.
Sure. Everybody has their own kind of pet thing that they think is the most important for health.
Right.
But,
and I hear that and I feel that. And I don't want to be part of that problem, because that is a problem that comes from the fact that the only reason we're eating these oils is because we were lied to about their health effects. And so that makes them, that's a red flag. That was a red flag for me when I discovered, way back now, 20 something years, when I discovered that I was lied to about their health effects. And I tell the story about how we all got fooled. And I think don't you feel like it's a little more important to understand like the root of a lie? Like, we were lied to about this stuff. We were never told glyphosate was healthy, eat more, right?
Right.
You know what I mean? So it seems different somehow.
Totally. Well, it's just shocking that something that is so chemically manipulated wasn't more thoroughly studied for safety prior to putting it in the food supply, right?
Yeah, it was grandfathered in because it came into the food supply at the turn of between 1800 and 1900, at the very beginning of the 1900s. And there was zero food safety standards at that point in time. Milk was often laced with borax, and they put like lead in wine to make it taste sweeter. Right?
Crazy.
No safety standards. And so it just got grandfathered in. But like that's to me, and I don't know, like, don't you feel, well, I felt like I was deceived, right? I felt like the American Heart Association lied to me and made me a bad doctor, because they were the ones telling me that saturated fat is bad and these vegetable oils are heart healthy. I guess that's maybe the point. Like, doesn't that seem a little beyond everything else we've heard about? We're eating these because the American Heart Association said they were heart healthy.
It is wild how corrupt so much of the information is. And I want to touch more on, so you were starting to talk about the cell membranes and how these impact cell membranes, but you describe how these seed oils actually are toxic and do promote oxidative stress, which we
Right.
know is the root cause of so many of the diseases that you just mentioned. So could you describe a little bit about that? How are these seed oils causing oxidative stress, and why is oxidative stress bad for us and contributing to
Yeah,
disease?
what even is it? So yeah, so the seed
Yeah.
oils are polyunsaturated. So remember from the earlier, very brief biochemistry lesson, the different types of fat, the oils are oily and they stay liquid in the fridge because they are polyunsaturated. Well, polyunsaturated fats have two double bonds or more. And because of that, oxygen breaks them easily. And that's the key. That's why they become toxic. Oxygen is everywhere. It's in our bodies, it's in the frying pan, it's in the factories. And oxygen will attack those big polyunsaturated fatty acid molecules and break them into small molecules that nature did not make. So polyunsaturated fatty acids are not toxic. They're actually nutrients. We need them. But the fact is that they're very fragile and oxygen attacks them. And so, in order to be healthy, our bodies supply our membranes with tons of protective chemicals, enzymes, and antioxidants. Vitamin E is one of the most famous um, chemicals that protects the polyunsaturated fatty acids in our membranes. Vitamin C is another one. Glutathione is another one. And there's all kinds of enzymes. So, there's a ton of technology to protect these polyunsaturates to protect them from being destroyed by oxygen. That's true in the seeds too. So nature puts all this technology in the seeds, like the soybeans and the sunflower seeds and the canola. Lots of antioxidants, lots of stuff, so that those polyunsaturates do not turn into toxic materials when they're broken down by oxygen. Right. So big molecules break into small ones; they become toxic when oxygen breaks them into small ones. They become toxic. Those are the toxins. That's how the toxins get into the bottles because they during the manufacturing, all of those antioxidants are stripped away. And there's no protection. And there's oxygen in the factory. And worse than that, there's a lot of heat. Heat accelerates reactions. So the crude soy oil, crude any of these hateful eight, the crude oil is inedible and vile. And if you were to smell it, it would burn. If you were to drink it, it would burn all the way down your stomach and then you would regurgitate it back up. That's your body's protective mechanism. That there's nothing else in the food supply that's like that. Not to mention nothing else. Oh, by the way, the American Heart Association says that these are the answer to heart disease, right? We
Totally.
got to keep
So,
coming back to that. We were lied to that these are healthy. That's the only reason that we're eating them.
and I think that the point that you just made is important, because sometimes people might get confused when you hear polyunsaturated fatty acid. We know there are types of these that are naturally occurring, like you mentioned, in meats and in fish. You think about your omega-3s, which everyone thinks of, oh, these are very healthy anti-inflammatory fats. But what you just said is that in those naturally occurring foods, they already have all the antioxidants needed to help protect you from that oxidation process, versus the seed oils where those antioxidants have been stripped. And so that's what makes them so readily oxidized and then causing this oxidative stress. And I think one of the things that you talk about that was very it made a lot of sense to me, but it was different than anything that I had heard before, is even thinking about metabolic disease, metabolic dysfunction as the root cause we often talk about is oxidative stress. And there's been so much focus, which I think has been good and necessary, on sugar as being a root cause, and refined carbohydrates as being a root cause for insulin resistance, diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease. But actually, you're saying this goes one layer deeper to the metabolic dysfunction that occurs with vegetable oils causing oxidative stress that then makes the sugar and the refined carbs so much more toxic to us.
Absolutely. And that is a metabolic shift that makes you and makes us crave sugar and carbohydrates. It changes our taste preference because what's going on here is that these oils are basically retooling our entire metabolism away from burning our own body fat. And that's why we have this obesity epidemic. It's not a deficiency of willpower. It's not just that the foods are addicting, like that doesn't help. Like, they're laced Doritos, right? They're
Sure.
kind of hard not to eat more than just one of those, not to make the whole bag go away.
They're
Um,
engineered, right, to make you eat more.
yeah, they're engineered with flavor, crunch, and everything else. But it goes way beyond that because we have been reformulated. Earlier, I mentioned about if you feed pigs too much soy oil, it changes their body fat and it goes from being firm, the way you want your bacon to have firm fat, to being kind of soft. When you touch it, it will like melt in your hands and just be off-putting and gray and disgusting. Well, gosh, the same exact thing happens to us. It's just that, it doesn't, it affects us the same way. I'm sure it affects the little piggies the same way too, that they're extraordinarily hungry and metabolically damaged. But what it does to us is it makes us basically we've reformulated our body fat so that we can build it easily, like always, but we cannot easily burn it off because this chemical change that promotes oxidative stress makes our cells not want to use body fat as much as they would rather use a safer fuel, being sugar.
I think this is something that people don't often think about, especially when their focus is on losing weight. And, there's so many different messages that we hear about what's important and this diet and that diet and, eat less sugar, exercise more. But we may be making it very difficult to lose weight if we still have those seed oils in our diet, is what you're saying.
Definitely. Well, we still have them in our body fat and they stay there for years. So we have to be patient and we cannot think of metabolic health as being I lost weight. Now I'm more metabolically healthy. No, we have to think of metabolic health as whether or not your cells are able to generate energy to sustain your satiety between meals so you don't feel hangry or hypoglycemic. You don't feel like your blood sugar's dropping and you need to snack between meals. Because what I just said, that need to snack, it's driven by metabolism. It's not driven by lack of willpower. It's not driven by fast metabolism, which a lot of people are totally wrongly told by healthcare practitioners. They think that if you get hungry a lot, it means you have a fast metabolism. Absolutely tragic advice, because what it really means is you're already insulin resistant and you're already metabolically damaged and you have toxic body fat that your cells don't want to burn. You're addicted to sugar. Your cells are addicted to sugar.
Wow. Let's say maybe thinking of patients that you've worked with and giving people some framework for thinking about what it looks like to come off the seed oils. So you're saying that it can take some time to actually turn over body fat so that the seed oils are eliminated and you're more metabolically healthy, maybe even before you lose weight. But how do you approach that with your patients? And what does the time course or process look like?
Well, it's like the process of weight loss. I mean, it literally is the process of weight loss because the only way to get these seed oils out of your body fat is to burn them for energy, just like losing weight. So if you have 50 pounds to lose, it's going to take at least as long as to lose those 50 pounds. But the other thing to consider is that you start feeling way better as soon as you get your meals right. And so this is why, like a lot of people do so well with the keto diet, because the keto diet directs people now. It didn't used to. When I first started practicing, the keto diet did not tell people to avoid the seed oils. Right? It would say, go ahead and have mayonnaise. Go ahead and make your sauce out of vegetable oil.
Yeah.
That was Atkins. That's because he didn't know about vegetable oils. But the keto diet, what it does is give you healthy fats and lots of protein. and you feel better. So the keto diet directs you to satiating foods, right? Because you can have eggs, you can have butter, you can have cheese, you can have all the things that have healthy fats in there. Oh, and the keto diet also has loads of protein because of all the different meats and of course eggs and cheese, and lots of minerals because it allows you to also have plants, right? Lots of plants and sometimes seeds. Chia seeds are sometimes considered keto compliant, seeds and nuts. So it's full of really healthy foods, but it's not the ketones that are helping people, in my view. Um, well, I can tell you why I say that, but anyway, so the keto diet helps people, and following a keto diet is great for most people, a lot of people. But some people have the low carb flu, and some people get over it, some people don't. I think that sometimes those people should be encouraged to eat a little bit more carbohydrates because they should be encouraged not to eat sugar, obviously, and not really necessarily refined flour. Ideally, it would be more, slow digesting kind of carbohydrates that would dribble out into their bloodstream slowly. And why do I say that? Well, because their cells are still addicted to sugar. You're not going to be cured. They're not going to be cured of that sugar addiction until you've reversed your insulin resistance, which means if you're type 2 diabetic, you got to first reverse your type 2 diabetes to reverse your insulin resistance. And that's not a short process, right? So for a while there, you got to kind of continue to feed those sugar-starved cells a little bit extra sugar. And I teach people how to determine whether or not that applies to them, or if they can just do straight up keto in dark calories. I have a little worksheet with 11 symptoms to watch for between meals. I tell you everything you need to know how to use it. And then I tell you how much carbohydrate to have and exactly what to eat. So you don't have to be guessing.
I love that. And I love how you have so many tools for people to even just signing up for your newsletter on your website. You're sending people a lot of tools to make this really practical. So, on that note, I'd love to talk a little bit about what this looks like in real life. How do we avoid seed oils, right? It's one thing I often will talk to patients and they'll say, oh, well, I always only use avocado oil and olive oil at home when I'm cooking, but it is so much more complicated than that. And there are so many places that these seed oils can sneak into our diet. So, how do you ensure that you have a seed oil free diet or extremely minimal?
Well, I do walk you through so you don't have to memorize anything right now, but I do walk you through everything you need to know in my detox. I ask people to take a 2-week challenge. And so I have a whole chapter on how to go through everything in your kitchen and find substitutes. I have a whole section about how to eat out and, what to do in restaurants and what's the best thing at different restaurants that you can order that's going to be either seed oil free or contain very few of them so that you can actually still, go out when necessary for socializing or, if you're just traveling. So, because they're everywhere. The whole world is trying to feed us these things. That's how we got to this point where they're 30% of your calories on average. And so they're in, when you go out to a fancy restaurant, they're going to be if your meat was marinated in something, it was part of the marinade. They're going to be in the dressings. If there's a sauce, it's going to be in the sauce. If your vegetables have any kind of fat on them, chances are it's not real butter or real cream. It's butter oil or one of these, vegetable oil based cream substitutes. This is even at fancy restaurants. I realized that, yeah.
No, I was just going to say this has been the most eye-opening thing to me because probably over the last 6 months to a year, I've been a lot more diligent about eating out, traveling, and even just calling restaurants to ask them about what oils they use. And it's sometimes the healthiest, the places that really look healthy, quote unquote, that really they're using canola oil as their primary cooking oil, or the fancier, like you said, the higher end restaurants too. It's very rare to find a restaurant that is not using these in some way. And even if you are, like for example, yesterday I went to a kind of fast salad restaurant and I asked if they had olive oil, and I'm so suspicious that actually it was some sort of blend where they had a little bit of olive oil with canola oil, which is very common, versus having pure olive oil. So it's blown my mind how rare it is to be able to eat out and actually avoid these things.
Yeah. And like, so I just wanted to ask, like, has it helped, like, for you to take that little bit of extra effort from whatever you were already doing? Has it made any kind of a difference for you?
I I think it has. And it's actually once because I do a lot of traveling. So once you figure out a few go-tos, a few places that are safe, it just makes it a lot easier. So it's not that hard to do a little bit of research up front. And then, yeah, obviously I'm not perfect, but you can kind of pick your places and you feel better about traveling. I always feel so much better when I'm at home, when I'm cooking myself and I know where all my food is coming from versus traveling. I can start to feel the impact of that on just my overall energy.
Yeah, so it's for I've heard other people say that like it wasn't like they were feeling better, but it wasn't until they really got good about dining out. Um, and this is usually people who dine out multiple times every single week, get a lot of their calories from restaurants,
Yeah.
where that makes a huge impact on their energy levels and their health and their gut inflammation and their skin health. And people even say things like they stop getting sunburns so easily, and they start to
Interesting.
tan where they've never tanned before in their lives. Now they can actually get a tan because it's the fats right under your skin too, and the
Wow.
UV
Yeah.
light will also break those polyunsaturated fatty acids into little toxins and promote inflammation. And that's what the redness is of a sunburn and swelling and pain and all that. That's inflammation.
Wow. Wow. Well, this is such powerful information. And it is such a complicated topic. Like you mentioned, it goes down into the biochemistry and the origins of where these seed oils even came from. I imagine that it's no surprise that you started writing about this 20 years ago and just now have come out with this particular book, because I can imagine it's been very hard to find truth when there's so much misinformation out there. So I just want to thank you for all the work that you've done and how much passion I can tell comes through when you talk about it, and how much work you're doing to get the word out there. Because it's one thing to do the research, right? And how many research papers and books actually just go sitting on shelves and don't actually get out into the way people are living their lives for many years. So I appreciate all the work that you're doing to uncover this information and to get it out to people.
Yes, thank you. And I've uncovered a lot of those research papers in the book and I cite them. So this isn't like, this is all based on science and the science of biochemistry and some heavy duty research that I had to wade through that was sitting on shelves, just waiting to see the light of day. So I hope to help it.
Right. And even toxicologists, right? You talk about interviewing different toxicologists and lipidologists and people that there is a lot of cross referencing that, journals that maybe are not specifically looked at in the health industry, but are applicable when you're looking at oils and how they're processed. So it's a huge body of work that you have done and have put out into the world. Just before we wrap up, I usually ask 3 questions at the end of every podcast, but I'd love to give you also an opportunity, like with everything in nutrition, right? There are people who take nutrition as religion, and there are people who are going to argue and find counterpoints. And so obviously when you put anything like this out into the world, there's going to be people who say, oh, this isn't true and this is why. And so is there anything that you want people to be armed with when they might hear kind of counterpoints to your argument that seed oils really are the root of so much oxidative stress and chronic disease?
Yes, absolutely. Because more than anything, the whole idea that these oils are heart healthy, it still exists. And there's still this huge infrastructure of doctors who promote these oils as healthy that are funded by the corrupt American Heart Association, who accepted money from Procter and Gamble. And so there are people who are trying to shut down this message, and you will see people saying, oh, well, there's no evidence. That's not true. They haven't, it's because the evidence isn't in the American Heart Association journals, obviously. It's in journals that doctors don't read, like you just said, that toxicologists write or that lipidologists write and physical chemists. It's very technical journals that doctors don't read. But that's where there's a ton of evidence. But you will see that, you also see that there's this whole other side conversation that has taken off for some reason around something called linoleic acid, which is one of the two polyunsaturated fatty acids. And it's an omega-6 fatty acid, and it plays a role in our bodies in responding to trauma and infection, and it promotes inflammation. And there's this whole group of people now that are seeing that you have to avoid every last gram of linoleic acid, and they're taking this whole thing way too far down a very dangerous tangent because it's not true, and it makes it so easy for the powers that be from the American Heart Association to take my message and shut it down. Because, it's complicated. The distinction is complicated. It just gets lumped into, oh, okay, so these people are saying vegetable oils are bad for this simple reason that I understand better than oxidation, which is what Dr. Kate's talking about. That's really complicated. But then these other folks are saying that that's not true. Seed oils aren't bad. So the whole piece of, the whole conversation is getting shut down because of that. So these folks are going to, you'll run into them if you start looking up about seed oils. If you're listening right now and you start looking up, you're going to see people saying that you need to avoid this thing called linoleic acid, which is in chicken, and it's in pork, and it's in seeds and olive oil. And that is just simply not true. They're making life complicated, and I wish they would stop doing that. I know their hearts are in the right place, but don't pay any attention to them. They're off down a tangent.
Well, it's what's hard when these topics are so complicated that, when the lay public is trying to understand something so complicated, it can be easy to confuse. So
definitely.
So just as we wrap up, so the three questions that I ask everyone at the end of the podcast. The first one is, what are the three things that you do on a regular basis that have the biggest impact on your health?
Well, so aside from the dietary stuff, maybe?
Sure. I think avoiding seed oils, we know is up there.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, I eat what I think is the healthiest possible diet. And I try to incorporate the unusual foods that I learned about when I was on Hawaii, which are fermented foods that are live culture. So I include kimchi, yogurt, things that have living bacteria in there that populate the microbiome with healthy living bacteria. I also incorporate bone broth because that was an aspect of every traditional cuisine that I learned about when I was studying traditional cuisine for my first book, Dark Calories, bone broth, just like saving the bones when you make a chicken. If you buy a rotisserie chicken, save those bones, a couple of chickens worth, boil them up and make broth. It's delicious. Or just buy it. It's really good. Broth has nutrients for your collagen, which is your skin, hair, nails, your joints, like so many things. And the third one is organ meat. So these are like very rare in our food supply today. Almost nobody eats liver, and then not to mention all the other things that people used to eat and that used to,
Right.
sustain their health. To wrap all that up, that's really just like learning more about food.
I love that. I love that. And eating in a way that people have been eating for many, many years and has correlated with longevity and health. I think actually I didn't bring up earlier, but there's this really fascinating graph that you have in the beginning of the book where you show the increase in seed oil consumption, and you show it in terms of pounds per US person per year from 1910 all the way up to 2020. And you see this steady increase in the seed oils, whereas saturated fat intake stays pretty flat, and actually, animal fats goes down over this time. And you note that things like heart attacks were very rare back in 1910, whereas in 2020, they're much more common. And obviously this graph doesn't show causation, it's correlation, but when there's something that biochemically and mechanistically does seem to have a link, it certainly does. I think it is striking to see the numbers look like that.
Yeah. And when there's no correlation, but we're taught that there was, right? That was my big beef with the American Heart Association.
Right.
Is, no pun intended. Is that they used to claim, and they still do, that we're eating more saturated fat, more animal fat, and that's what's causing heart attacks. Simply not true.
Crazy. Yeah. Wow. My second question is, what is one thing you think would have a big impact on your health, but you have a hard time implementing it, or something that you're working on?
Oh yeah. So let's see here. I suppose it would have to be like better sleep.
Yeah,
And I'm
that's a
definitely
common
working
answer
on
I get here on the podcast.
it. Yeah, and I'm definitely happy to say that I'm getting better at it. Found some like tricks that work for me a little bit, and so
That's
I'm getting
great.
close to achieving that dream.
That's great. Well, yes, nothing like many years of medical training to mess with your sleep wake cycle too, right?
Yeah.
Um, the last question is, what does a healthy life look like to you?
I think it looks like family and food, really. That is like what used to be what defined cultures, believe it or not, is different beliefs around food. Like that is the root of so much of human previous existence was having one group would have a different belief around food and what you're supposed to eat than another group. And that defined the group. And it kept them from fighting over resources.
Fascinating. Yeah.
So food and family, that's the beginning of human culture.
I love that. I love that. Beautiful. Well, once again, thank you so much. I also failed to point this out, but I know my audience would be interested since so many of them are athletes, but I know you have done a lot of work with athletes and you brought a lot of your findings to the NBA and the Lakers. And so maybe you could touch on just briefly the impact that you see in athletes once they remove seed oils from their diets and start eating this way that you describe. What impact have athletes seen on their performance?
Yeah, it dramatically improves their recovery time from just regular exercise because it takes away so much inflammation, right? Exercise, can cause some oxidative stress and that can cause inflammation. And when your body can't handle oxidative stress, just regular exercise, you can feel really sore the next day. It takes longer to recover. So if you're an athlete, it just so improves your performance. And, one of the, actually my former boss, he hired me to work at his company as their doctor because changing the diet helped him perform better in CrossFit as
That's awesome.
as like an almost 40-year-old than he ever had as a 20-year-old.
Wow. It's amazing, right? It's all about the fuel that you put in to help fuel your performance and fuel your recovery. And so I'm glad you're bringing so much awareness to the impact of seed oils, which people might not be as aware of as they are of other things like processed foods in general or sugar. And so once again, thank you so much for sharing this message and thank you for spending so much time with me.
Well, thank you, Julie. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoy listening to the podcast, please consider subscribing and giving it a 5-star rating on iTunes. It really does help to get the word out to more people.